Hey,
Good morning, Tony. How you doing?
good. How are you?
I'm doing good. How's your week been?
Interesting. Still trying to get used to this new job.
Hmm.
Just a whole different type of work. Like a huge learning curve, which makes me uncomfortable. But
Right.
it is what it is.
Right. Starting over, it's like being a
Literally,
freshman at a new school, right?
yeah, being the new guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I went up to Huntsville this week and was able to go up to the property on the mountain where we planted the orchard.
Uh,
And it's interesting because they're about 2 weeks behind where we are. So like there's a lot of things that haven't started leafing out, but it's just like right on the edge of spring. And
yeah,
it's such like taking a time warp when you travel north. It's like, oh, I'm going back in time. But I guess with as much writing as you're doing, you probably have that experience.
yeah. It's interesting watching the different how it looks different in different places.
Yeah. Yeah.
We went down to Cahaba River Park yesterday.
Hmm.
And one, the river was swollen because of the rain, which was a
Hmm.
different look. But then, like even down there, all of the trees are not in the same level of bloom.
Oh,
So,
right. Yeah. Good morning, Melissa and Paula.
Hello.
hey,
I have someone to introduce.
Okay. Oh my goodness.
uh,
This is Josephine.
Josephine.
Yeah, I'm calling her JoJo. She
Uh-huh.
came home yesterday. She's 12 weeks old.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, she's very active. She's very mad. I'm holding her so she can't go play.
she's 12 weeks old. That's what they do.
That's right. Her job.
How's y'all's week been?
Good. Today's my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
We
Like,
could all
Exciting.
we could sing an out of sync happy birthday to you.
oh my gosh, happy birthday on Zoom is a nightmare. Yeah, I will not make you do that.
I won't inflict that on you either. So
That part.
When our daughter Rachel was 18 months old,
thank you.
she climbed up in my lap at bedtime. I would always rock her to sleep and tell her a story and sing lullabies to her. And she climbed up in my lap and looked at me and said, "Mommy, please don't sing." And that was probably the best evaluation of my voice I've ever.
Shade.
Mm.
Well, kids and old people, neither of them care about what they say, who they say it to.
Oh, in my Baptist days, we had a 98-year-old lady named Miss Trixie who was the sweetest thing. And she walked into the church office one day and cussed the secretary out for a mistake she had made in the bulletin.
Mm-hmm.
And the secretary looked at her and said, "Miss Trixie, what's wrong with you?" And Trixie said, "I've spent my whole life saying what people."
Oh, we missed it. Wait, did I miss it?
Oh no.
What I'm really thinking.
I missed the punchline. What was the
I
punchline?
missed part of the
You broke
punchline.
up, Paula. We were all invested and then you froze.
I didn't know first. She said, "I spent my whole life saying what people wanted me to say. From now on, I'm saying what I'm really thinking."
That part. You
And
know
I-
what?
Go
I had
ahead.
I had a gospel choir back in the early aughts, and we used to go around to nursery homes singing. And New Pilgrim Towers is on the south side, over near Avondale, and we would go there at least once or twice a year to sing. So like our third year in, well, whenever we went, they were always very complimentary. Like, oh, y'all sound so good. Oh, that sounds so nice. Our third year in, there was this crowd of ladies that we were passing. Oh, y'all sound so good. Y'all sound so nice. One lady, y'all sure have gotten fat. And we're like, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am. What are you gonna say to a 92-year-old woman who calls you fat? Nothing.
Nothing. Well, I'm not sure. I don't know if Meg and Rob are gonna be with us today. I haven't heard anything, so we'll just kind of go.
I'm getting my Pop-Tart. I'll be right back.
Okay. All right. We'll wait for you to get your Pop-Tart. So let's think about the distribution. I guess Melissa, can you do the gospel reading? Okay. And do you also mind being voice of the people? Okay, sounds good. So Tony, Melissa's going to be voice of the people. If Meg and Rob show up, then we can redistribute roles. So let me go ahead and get the liturgy up so we can get started. Oops. Can y'all see that?
Yes.
Good.
All right. Good morning. Today is the traditional feast of Saint Fotina, a name given to the anonymous woman at the well who talked boldly with Jesus about living water. And she said, "Give me this water always." It is also the day Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. The idea that matter, space, and time are interrelated has changed not only physics, but philosophy and theology, causing us to reevaluate how we think about reality and consciousness. Come within the circle, all you who have been standing before the wind, chilled to the bone by what you have seen.
Tired to your soul for the sake of those who have been swept away, weary of war, watching another crack in the foundation of our history.
Come within the circle, come now, for all are welcome and none turned away.
There is room for you here, friends who care, healing of mind and spirit, nourishment for the faith that keeps you strong.
Come within the circle, the embrace of the love we share, and find the hope you thought had gone away.
Here within the circle, waiting for you to take it up once more.
Psalms 51. Happy is the woman or man whose transgressions is forgiven, whose sin is covered.
Happy is the woman or man to whom the Holy One does not reckon iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit.
While I kept silence, my bones wasted away and my groaning all the day.
For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength melted away as by the heat of summer.
My sin I made known to you, and my iniquity I did not hide.
I said, I will make known my transgressions to the gracious one, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin.
Caught me there eating. Therefore, let all who are faithful offer prayer to you.
Who are found at such time, for a rush of mighty waters shall not touch them.
You are a hiding place for me. You keep me from distress. You surround me with cries of deliverance.
So Melissa, before you read, I just need to say I had put this at the top. It said the message. This is obviously not the message. This is also from Will Gaffney's A Women's Lectionary for the Whole Church. So just wanted to give credit where credit is due.
Hebrew Bible reading, Numbers 5, 5 through 10 and following. The Holy One spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the daughters and sons of Israel. When a man or a woman commits any of the wrongs common to humanity, breaking faith with the Holy One, that person is guilty. Then they shall confess the sin that they committed. The person shall make full restitution of the wrong. They shall add 1/5 to the top and give it to the one wrong. If there is no next of kin to make restitution for the wrong, The restitution for the wrong shall go to the Holy One for the priest, in addition to the ram of atonement with which atonement is made for the one wronged. And all the offerings of all the holy gifts of the daughters and sons of Israel, every gift that they bring to the priest shall be his. Each priest keeps these holy gifts. Each shall give what was given to him.
I'm so sorry. There are like tiny kitten meows in the background, so please ignore those. She's fine. She's just playing. Matthew 5:21-26. Jesus said, "You have heard it, that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be subject to judgment. But I say to you all that if you are angry with a sister or brother, you will be liable to judgment. And if you call a sister or a brother an idiot, you will be subject to the council. And if you say, you fool, you will be subject to the hell of fire. Therefore, if you are offering your gifts at the altar, and you remember that your sister or brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to favorable terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way with them, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the court officer, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny." May God add blessings to the reading of this word. Thanks be to God.
While Einstein rejected the idea of a personal God, he maintained that mysticism was important for science and the work of being human. He wrote, "A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from the prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. The true value of a human being is determined by the measure and the sense in which they have obtained liberation from the self. We shall require a substantial new manner of thinking if humanity is to survive." Amen.
Yeah, pretty smart dude, Albert was. So we'll go to God in a time of prayer. I'll get us started. And those of you on Zoom, if you would like to lift up a prayer concern, feel free to just say it out loud or put it in the chat. If for those of you who are streaming on Facebook or YouTube, if you would like to lift up a prayer request, you can type it in the comments, and Leah will read it to Angela and she'll read it out loud. We'll incorporate the prayers of the community that way so we can be in this very extended circle online as we pray. Let's go to God in prayer. Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for the change of seasons that we can see around us. I'm amazed when I see peach blossoms, when I see plants leafing out. We see the activity of the birds. God, it reminds us that there's always new life, and new life keeps going regardless of what's happening in our personal lives or in the global political stage. Life keeps going. We give you thanks for that. Sometimes we are experiencing tragedy and we wonder why the world doesn't stop, why things don't just pause the way our minds do. God, we know that we are part of this wonderful creation, that the pain that we feel is part of the pain of the universe, and that you also feel it. That there's no tragedy or fear or worry that we experience that you don't also experience. All of our sufferings are tied to Jesus weeping in the garden, asking if this cup can pass from him. But we also trust that that kind of resurrection and faith can also be ours. And that's why we're grateful for spring. and why we keep hope even in difficult times. We lift up to you especially today the people of Ukraine, the people who are under siege, and the people who are living in war zones in our own communities, either because of violence or abuse or addiction or incarceration. We lift up to you people who are oppressed by unjust systems. We're mindful of the ways that we tend to give allegiance to things that are idols. Keep us focused on you and on the truth, and not on the petty tyrant gods of our own making. And God, we lift up to you the concerns that are close to our own hearts, the people and situations in our own areas, and we name them before you now. I invite you all to share.
John and Diane Bredehoff.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Family of Lawrence Speed.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Healing prayers for Parker and for Jane.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Vicky McCarty.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Better work conditions for the Amazon workers and other people who are working too hard for the wages they receive.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gratitude for new opportunities for Kathy and Claire.
Lord, hear our prayer. For Eddie Easterling and his family, Lord, hear our prayer.
Gratitude for safe surgery and prayers for a quick recovery for Stan Pala.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Lauren Sparks.
Lord, hear our prayer. For the student protesters in Florida, Lord, hear our prayer.
Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks that you hear prayers and that you answer. We also give you thanks, God, that you give us the words of Jesus himself. And just for context, I'm going to be praying the Lord's Prayer as it's written in the First Nations version of the New Testament. O great Spirit, our Mother and Father from above, we honor your name as sacred and holy. Bring your good road to us where the beauty of your ways in the spirit world above is reflected in the earth below. Provide for us day by day the elk, the buffalo, and the salmon, the corn, the squash, and the wild rice, all the things we need for each day. Release us from the things we have done wrong, in the same way we release others for the things done wrong to us. Guide us away from the things that tempt us to stray from your good road, and set us free from the evil one and his worthless ways. Aho, may it be so. So I want to spend a little time talking about both the passages, both from the Hebrew Bible and from the New Testament today. They have to do with forgiveness, and not just forgiveness, but some additional concepts that often kind of get breezed over when we talk about forgiveness. And I have to start off by saying, especially in this time, in this situation, in our context, we have to acknowledge before we start talking about forgiveness, how abusers and politicians have weaponized forgiveness, right? In fact, anytime I feel like I want to preach about forgiveness, which was something that Jesus talked a lot about, I have to start off by acknowledging how forgiveness has been used to do harm. Especially, we have examples, white people saying that Black folks should just forgive racism. Why can't people get over it, right? Preachers have sent women back into abusive relationships with sappy words about forgiving the person hurting them. And of course, the priestly role itself has been a form of abuse, right? We've heard of Native American children buried in mass graves in so-called residential schools, which were really a form of genocide. And we've heard about sexual misconduct in churches among priests. We remember televangelists crying about forgiveness after they have done massive wrong. So I have to indicate all that to show how forgiveness has been often weaponized in the service of abuse and oppression and exploitation. So yes, we have to acknowledge that. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that that's because it's abuse, right? Abusers act like abusers, predators act like predators. And they often latch on to ideas like forgiveness or like God, or they latch onto holy words as a form of elevating their own power and perpetuating their own abuse. So we acknowledge that that's simply part of the package of evil, of things done that are wrong. But all of that doesn't change the fact that forgiveness is often the only way forward for our own growth and for creating peace in the world and in our own lives. That doesn't mean we have to be doormats and forgiveness and promote forgiveness in the generic sense, but it helps to dig into what these passages actually say about forgiveness. So let's look at what's involved in biblical forgiveness. The first thing you see in both of these passages is that in the Hebrew Bible and in Jesus' own message, the kind of forgiveness they talk about involves restitution and reparation. These are two similar concepts. They're slightly different. Restitution, it comes from to restore. So you're restoring something that has been taken or something that has been broken, right? So if you've stolen something, you return it. And we can think about what restitution means, especially in the contemporary world, if we start talking about things like land, like all of the land that we're sitting on was stolen land. When we were looking for a house to purchase, I got on Zillow, of course, like lots of people do, and looked at different homes. And sometimes, I don't know if you are the same way, sometimes I get on Zillow just to pretend like if I had money and I was going to live somewhere else, where would I live? And I look at the different homes, and sometimes it's fun to see houses that are in done in very interesting architectural styles or hideous interior decorating. There's whole websites devoted to that. Anyway, you go on these sites and you look at these places where people live and you imagine living there. I continued to do research. I would get on, I would find the county tax assessor website and see, okay, where actually are the lines? Who owns this land? And you get on the tax assessor website, and there are all these blocks, all these lines designating where someone's property ends and the next person's property begins. And it's all based on lies. All of it. Because it's all stolen land. All of this land belonged to Native Americans. And that's why I felt like today if we're going to talk about forgiveness and restitution and reparation, I needed to start with Stephen Charleston, who's a Native American Episcopal bishop who he's on Facebook, and I took his words from a post he made recently as our introduction, and I felt like I needed to take the Lord's Prayer from the First Nations text, because all of the land that we live on is stolen. So what would forgiveness even mean in that context? I know it boggles the mind, right? How would we operate as a society if we suddenly said all that green space? By the way, if you get on the tax assessor website and you look at who owns property, you drive around, you see these vast expanses of hills with trees. And in Alabama, those aren't actually trees, they're board feet, because they're owned by logging companies, or they're owned by Alabama Power, or they're owned by Drummond Company. And they sell them to logging companies. So, but they're not owned by those giant corporations, are they? They have no right to that land. The fact that when you're born, you come into a world and every square foot of our planet is already owned by somebody. And so as soon as you come into existence on the planet, you're supposed to pay somebody for your right to breathe and exist on the land. That would have been totally foreign to the people who actually stewarded this land for thousands of years. So restitution, that's one thing. The other concept is reparations. Reparations comes from repair. It means to, if something's damaged, you repair it. And reparations can come in the form of financial reparations. It can come in the form of actually physical labor, fixing something. Again, I remember being a child, and when I would do something wrong, sometimes my parents would help me fix something. Oh, you broke this? Well, let's work to fix it, because that's your duty once you've broken something. So restitution, reparation, those are all important. And there's another piece in there, right? Confession. Confession means you acknowledge that you did something wrong. And this is maybe one of the most important pieces, because the fact is you can restore property, you can repair stuff, you can repair relationships, but only if there is confession, if there's an acknowledgement, hey, I did something wrong. And this is, I think, where it gets a little sticky, because what keeps us from admitting we've done wrong? It's usually pride. It's usually something, it's an image of ourselves being on the right side of morality. I am justified in my anger. I am in the right. This other person has to apologize to me before I take a step to move, to do anything about it, right? And usually that's ridiculous. I mean, what the Bible makes a point of over and over again is saying, like, we are all contributing to something, right? There's room for confession and apology for everybody. If you're going to be involved in a long-term relationship, if you're going to be married, if you're going to be a parent, if you're going to be a friend, you better learn how to apologize, even if you think you're in the right. One of the things that my dad taught me early on was you can either be right and feel morally justified, or you can be in relationship. And sometimes you have to weigh that decision, right? I'm not saying every relationship needs to be salvaged, especially, again, in terms of abusive or exploitive or oppressive relationships. Sometimes we can let those people go. But if there's someone that I want to be connected to, sometimes I have to make a choice. Am I going to be right, or am I going to be in relationship? So apologies, confession, that's important. And it involves humility. Part of it is, can I take a step outside myself and look at myself and see something from someone else's perspective? Like, that's part of spiritual growth. So restitution, reparation, and confession, all of these three things are important in forgiveness. So in Jesus's story, it's interesting because he starts off talking about anger. If you're angry with a brother or sister, you've already sinned. And I think it's important to kind of take a step back and acknowledge that Jesus is speaking rhetorically. Okay. Anger, I don't think anger is always a negative emotion. Sometimes we need to feel anger. Sometimes we need to admit, that we feel anger. I think one of the most dangerous things is when Christians feel like anger is not emotion I should feel, and I'm going to pretend that I'm not angry, even as I'm justifying my actions out here, hurting somebody else. I'm going to pretend that I'm not angry because I shouldn't be angry. Just admit that we're angry, right? Just confess it. And anger is not necessarily a bad thing. But what does it lead to, right? If I hold on to it, if I prize it as something that I'm entitled to in order to protect me from wounding, sometimes anger can be a problem. And that's why when he says, if you're angry with a brother or sister, he starts off there, because when he starts talking about what you should do, it's not you bringing someone else to court, it's someone else bringing you to court. He says, come to term quickly with your accuser while you're on the way to trial with them. And suddenly he's switched perspectives, right? If you're angry with someone else, usually you're thinking, I'm in the right, they're in the wrong. But suddenly in Jesus' example, I'm in the wrong and they're in the right. And that requires a certain level of spiritual maturity for me to confess, to say, maybe I had a hand in this. Maybe I have something to apologize for. Maybe I should be the one thinking about restitution and reparation on the way to court with somebody. And so when we start talking about bigger issues like racism and like the theft of Native American land and that sort of thing, that's when I think Jesus's words totally undermine the weaponization of forgiveness, right? It's an acknowledgement that in systems of inequality or in systems where someone's been hurt, if I have a role in that, then I have to look at confession and restitution and reparation. Now, interpersonally, of course, I'm not telling people, oh, you ought to forgive somebody. But I do think there's a certain level of spiritual maturity that Jesus is calling us to think about, all right, what is my contribution to the problem? And if I want to be in relationship with somebody, what does it look like to talk about restitution, reparation, and confession? Part of this is simply, I think what Jesus wants us to do is to come into honest relationship with each other. That's why I think in the Sermon on the Mount, when he talks about how to pray, he says, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who we owe. Forgive us the wrong things we do as we forgive the wrong things done to us. It's not a one-to-one relationship. It's a recognition that I screw up sometimes. And I think as a husband, as a father, as a friend, saying to myself and saying out loud, sometimes I screw up, is an important place to come to for spiritual growth. And I hope it's something, if I can practice that personally, I hope it's something we can also practice as communities and as larger bodies, so that we can start talking about, what does restitution mean? What does reparation mean? I have to bring out an example because it's on my mind and on my heart. Lots of people are excited about legalization of cannabis and other drugs and an end to the war on drugs. And there's white guys who have dispensaries in California and Colorado making millions and millions of dollars, while there are still Black folk in prison for possession. And here in Alabama, we see the same thing. Black folks in Huntsville are 11 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than white folks, even though we know that people use drugs at the same rate. So when we start talking about reparations and restitution and going to prison, we have to lift that up as a primary example, because I think God is speaking directly to our world, to our political institutions, and to the church. So considering, what does restitution mean? What does reparation mean? What does confession mean in that context? I think I don't want to just focus purely on the systemic stuff, because there's personal stuff here too, but they are so intimately related. How I forgive others and how I expect forgiveness in return. So that's what I want to offer today. Jesus's words and the Hebrew Bible's words on what forgiveness actually means. I'd love to hear your response and perspectives.
Well, go ahead, Paula.
I wish I had caught the whole story, and I wish my memory was better than it is. But a couple of weeks ago on the news, one northern state, of course it's not Alabama, we never do anything smart, had made marijuana legal, recreational use, and they were offering licenses to dispensaries to begin with only to people who had already served time for possessing marijuana, to give them a chance to get a step ahead because of what they had already experienced.
And they know the business.
Yeah.
Wow. I hadn't heard. I would like to know the details on that. That's
I will see if I can find it.
We ain't doing that, sis.
We ain't doing anything smart here.
That ain't gonna happen here. I want to say, like, I am a person, and I say that I struggle with forgiveness, and people will tell you that I struggle with forgiveness. It's not that. I struggle with people thinking they can get away with stuff and you can't say anything about it. I am the person where if I make a mistake, I'm the first person to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I did not mean to do that. I screwed up, whatever. But if you think you're going to screw over me and I'm going to just sit there and take it, then you got another thing coming. Because I made a post the other day, like, if you wrong me and I know I haven't done anything to you, I don't care if I ever speak to you again. And that may not be the most Christian thing to do. I'm not going to dig ditches for you and try to get you back, but you will never get that opportunity with me again. Mm-hmm. I'm not, the whole misquoted turn the other cheek trope, they can keep that. I'm not doing any of that. One of my favorite examples of forgiveness, again, I think every time we talk about this, I go to The Shack by William Young. And there's a quote in there that says, forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about letting go of another person's throat. Forgiveness does not create a relationship unless people speak truth about what they've done and change their mind and behavior. Without that, a relationship of trust is not possible. When you forgive someone, you certainly release them from judgment, but without true change, no real relationship can be established. Forgiveness in no way, I'll say this again, forgiveness in no way requires that you trust the one you forgive. But should they finally confess and repent, you will discover a miracle in your own heart that allows you to reach out to them again to build a bridge between you and that person for reconciliation. Like, for me, that's what forgiveness should look like. I'm not going to forgive and forget, because then you can get me again. Like, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
But in no way do I need to hold that animosity towards you. For me, people who done me wrong, like, they really don't even exist. Like, they just, I don't have time for you. I don't have space for you. You do not exist.
Well, I think there's part of what you said made me think about, and I had forgotten to bring this up while I was talking. There's in a legal world, there's this idea that you can have a settlement, right? There's sort of an agreement, usually a financial agreement that you come to, and someone will walk away. So you don't go to court, but you walk away saying, okay, I didn't do anything wrong. Like, this, the settlement doesn't mean that I did anything wrong, right? And I think oftentimes that's the position we find ourselves in relationships, where there's this reluctance to confess, and it's probably better in that sense that the relationship end. Yeah.
Meg has a negative knowledge from that old Negro spiritual from Tupac Shakur. Says, I still want to see you eat, just not at my table.
Yeah, there's also the sense of I can let you go without wishing you ill. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be having dinner together. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's that confession and repentance piece that I think gets lost both interpersonally and systemically. I mean, I have come to believe that at least half the time when people say, well, you should just forgive, what they're really saying is you should just not care. You should just, let me off the hook. You should, forget this ever happened. And that statement is more about the person saying it, saying like, I don't want to have to go through the difficult process of confession and repentance because that's really hard on the ego. And I think that we confuse the ideas of I have done something wrong and I am a bad person. We confuse like the doing with the character. And when I'm saying like, you have to forgive me or you just need to forget that I did that, what I'm really saying is I don't want you to view me as a bad person. And I think when that phenomenon shows up in systems, racially, talked about today with land, then there's a whole lot of harm and violence that can come out of that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, like they tell, like y'all should just forgive the 400 years of slavery that your people endured. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about the breeding camps. We don't want to talk about, the lashing. We just want to talk about the antebellum South and how great it was. And it's like, no, you don't get to do that. And when you think about forgiveness in this country, who gets it more than anybody else? White people, white women in particular. I'm still pissed off at that woman who got her there and cried after she shot that boy for no apparent reason with her taser, knowing like there's no way anybody would say that she was not responsible for what she did. I can't go to her intent, but she's definitely responsible, right? But then you get it there and you do a couple of white tears for the judge, and all of a sudden, well, this is a white woman who cried, so we just can't really be that hard on her because what would they think about America? I'm like, get out of here, put her away. How many Black people get put in jail for things that they didn't mean to do? Oh, just get shot in the back without even due process. But somehow I know that you want to give this woman the benefit of the doubt, and we're going to forgive her because that's what the Lord said, dude. My Lord didn't say that.
I think you're muted.
Dave.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Hardware mute. Brian Stevenson talks about how, you're more than the worst thing you've ever done. Right. And again, such a powerful statement. And it's important that we think about how is that applied? Right. Is that applied to the police officer on the stand who's crying? Okay. You're more than the worst thing you've ever done. Or does it apply to we incarcerate more people than any other country? Does it apply to all the people who are in there? Right. That's the question. And I think that's where, when we think about forgiveness and reciprocity and making reparations, that definitely has to be, how we extend it. If we're only extending forgiveness to some people, then it's still weaponized forgiveness. Yeah. Angela and then Tony.
Chris says, you need to forgive too often means someone, means someone wants to avoid consequences, either for themselves or for someone in their tribe. It's linked to protest, but nicely. And if you just weren't so sensitive.
Absolutely. The one thing I was going to say about the statement that Melissa said earlier is the fact that you are not the act that you commit is really the only like palpable way of me saying like love the sinner and hate the sin. Like when people say that, like I don't like the context that they typically use it in, but in what she said, like I'm not the act that I did. Like that is the perfect example of that used in context. Because a lot of times when people say that, they're still condemning the person, but like what she said was the only way that phrase has ever made sense to me. That we've all made mistakes and we can move on from those. But you can't say you made a mistake because you are a mistake, and then say hate the sin and love the sinner.
Thanks for that.
Teresa comments, I've watched people weaponizing forgiveness, talking to Ukrainians right now. It's kind of astounding how people can try to avoid the consequences of their actions or excuse them. Reparations and restitution are so important and vital for the oppressor as well, even though usually the oppressor doesn't realize it. We need indigenous wisdom to restore the land. We grasp our illusory ownership so hard and destroy the very thing we're so sure we own. It's tragic and harms everyone.
Wow, that's a great observation, Teresa. Yeah, I mean, right now we're talking about, so much of addressing climate change is about recognizing that indigenous stewards of the land were able to do this for thousands, if not millions of years. And we need that wisdom to turn things around, to keep the world from being ruined. Absolutely.
Dave, I just put a link in the chat to an article about the marijuana permits or the dispensary permits. Unfortunately, it's from Fox News, and I do not watch Fox News, but that was the first one that came up on a search.
Thank you for sharing that link.
Yeah, it's really important to remember that asking for forgiveness is a set of behaviors. It's not just a statement. It's not just a verbal interaction. If I want someone to forgive me for something that I've done, I've got to be willing to, make amends, I guess, in the 12-step tradition. I think that they have really good language to talk about that. But, if I demand forgiveness and don't show that I'm trying to take steps to make sure that thing never happens again, that's a pretty hollow interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Dave,
Yeah.
I have a question more than a statement, but how does forgiveness play into our penal system? For someone to get a life sentence, does that mean that we never forgive them, or that, I've always struggled with, the fact that they say that our penal system should be rehabilitation for people who do wrong, but that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It does not happen.
Right. I mean, I think it's a good question. I think part of it is, I was actually just reading this morning about this whole idea of tough on crime, and looking at the Supreme Court nominee.
Tough on Black people?
That's exactly right. Right. And so that's why one of the things that they're looking at deploying against the new Supreme Court nominee in hearings, because she was a public defender. I think systemically, I really love what Brian Stevenson says. He says, you are more than the worst thing you've ever done. And, when we look at murderers like Moses and David, and, people who went on to be heroes of faith, part of that, the story is that, this is the worst thing you can do, is murder somebody. You've extinguished a whole world. Do we just take that person and throw them away forever? Again, thinking sensitively about victims' rights and that kind of thing. I think it's it's something that we are supposed to struggle with. And a lot of people don't want to struggle with it. They just want to say, lock them up, throw away the key. They're done. They don't ever get to do anything again with their life. And I don't really see how there's a big distinction between that and murder, honestly. I think that's what Jesus is talking about. If you're angry with your brother or sister, you've murdered. How many people have we murdered through the state just in the last few years because of capital punishment? Murdered on our behalf. And I think that's I don't know, I'm rambling now, but I feel like the whole idea behind restorative justice, behind the we don't do it. We don't do it at all in our penal system. It's one other thing I think is important to point out is that the biggest provider of mental health care in the state is the prison. So people weren't getting what they needed. That's why they're in prison, and that's a huge component of this. Anyway, I'll stop. Angela?
Camille writes, too many times forgiveness masquerades as gaslighting. The best visual of the beginning of where forgiveness can lead us is the picture of the Ukrainians who are giving food to the Russian soldier who has surrendered to them.
Wow, that's a good point. Thank you for that. Yeah, Tony?
Again, they are much better people than me, but you said something that made me think about when you talk about like pretty much just throwing people away. You know, again, I just cannot help but to think about the racist narrative that creates. I mean, think about the reason race was created anyway, to dehumanize Black people, right? So that meant that we were suitable for chattel slavery because we were not regarded as full human beings. When you look at the way that the penal system, our justice system works, it's the same thing, because when a Black person does the slightest thing, it's like, let's throw the book at them, they never get to come out again. You literally can have a white boy raping a woman behind a dumpster, and the narrative is we don't want to put him in jail because it may ruin the rest of his life.
Right.
Because we are not considered full human beings, and he is.
Yep. 100%. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Tony, that case has been in the back of my mind this whole time. I mean, the quote was, we shouldn't ruin this young man's life because of 20 minutes of action. And I'm thinking, like, how often is a Black person killed over no action? Like,
no action.
Laying in bed. Brianna,
laying in bed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Being in your own home. I mean, the system is so backwards, obviously.
But people don't understand, people like me who are like have a very, very sensitive eye for racism, both systemic and just the institutional stuff. Well, everything you talk about is racism. Race. This country was created, like formed in racism, like it's part of the DNA of the country. And unfortunately, people talk about being anti-racist. People talk about how we can make better, burn it down because it wasn't built right from the beginning. Like that's the only thing. You have to start over, and unfortunately, because of the redistribution of power, people don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think, and I think something you said up there about the redistribution of power, that's one of the things that I think that complicates even interpersonal forgiveness, because you really are talking about a redistribution of power. For someone to say, I did something wrong, or I contributed to this, and I'm going to attempt to make reparations or restitution, or I'm going to confess it. It is a giving up of power, right? And I think Melissa earlier you said that, like the ego, right? The ego doesn't want to give that up. Like, that's my security. And for me to say I screwed up and then to take steps means that I am losing something, instead of this idea that no, you're actually gaining something. Like, for me to confess, so I think I'm holding on to power, but I'm really not. I'm actually getting something better if I give up some of this power, is something I think. And that's one reason even when we talk about systemic stuff, we can't just frame it as this is a loss. Thinking of it instead as like, oh, we have to redistribute wealth or redistribute land. This isn't a loss. Like, we're on a ship that's going down. Like, if we redistribute land, if we think about things differently, if we give up power, we might get something better, like survival. Anyway. Other thoughts, responses?
I just want to say I agree with someone else that said something about gaslighting when it comes to forgiveness. Like, and it's almost like if you don't forgive people who done you wrong, that's how I know that you're the problem. And it's like, well, no, they literally just stole my chickens, and now you want me to give them eggs. Give me my chickens back.
Miriam has a comment from the writings of Resmaa Menakem. She says, Resmaa talks a lot about clean pain and dirty pain. Not owning what has occurred continues to pile up our problems. not wanting to face that pain.
Yeah, no, it's true. I love his writing on this subject. The idea that, you know, people's accumulated trauma over time looks like culture, and yeah, we see that a lot today.
You know, that one other thing that quote made me think about in my other life, as an HIV advocate and activist. Like, I find people who do the best with the HIV diagnosis are people who pretty much own their complicity in getting this diagnosis. People who blame people for their actions or what has occurred to them. I mean, there are certain people who I extend a huge amount of grace to. Like, if you were raped or something like that, that's different. But like, you had a hand in what happened to you, and if you're gonna move past that, you have to own it. You know, not just with the diagnosis, but even when you've done wrong to people, you have to own it. Otherwise, it becomes a stumbling block. You never get past it. Like, you're trying to move against this rock and you'll never do it because you haven't owned. When you own your piece of it, it kind of elevates you over it so you can move over it instead of trying to plow through it. You know, but until you elevate yourself by admitting what you did, you're not going to be able to push through that. It's just going to remain a stumbling block.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that reminds me kind of what Melissa was saying earlier about like 12-step programs. I mean, you see a lot with people who have chronic substance use problems. It's everybody else's fault. And there's this systemic blaming of other people. Or if this were different, it's the world is against me, poor me. And there is a sense of once I admit my part in it, I suddenly have ownership over it. And it's not just poor me, everyone's against me and I'm treated unfairly. It's I have a role and I have to admit my powerlessness. And then suddenly once I think one of the important parts of this is then the community can come in and help. But as long as I'm saying it's everybody else's fault, then it's hard for me to get ownership of that. Yeah.
Teresa's comment speaks to that as well, Dave. She says, forgiveness has been powerful for me on the other side. Once I saw it as canceling a debt, it helped a lot. Emotional debt collecting can be exhausting, especially if the person is never going to acknowledge or make amends. Sometimes nothing they do can make it right. I can just quit trying to emotionally debt collect from someone who will never even try.
Wow.
That's a gift to myself. I don't have to let them back in my life, but that's my own personal relationship to forgiveness after a lot of working through it. It's not going to work for all people, and demanding forgiveness isn't the same as asking and allowing that the person who you're asking has every right to deny you forgiveness.
That's a good word, Teresa. Thank you for that. There's a lot of wisdom in that. I think I love the idea of emotional debt collecting. I don't want to be a bill collector. I appreciate that. That's wonderful. Well, we're drawing up on 11 o'clock. I really appreciate the rich discussion about what I think is an important and timely topic. Also, we're here in Lent. And if you're not familiar with, I just had it. I was going to show it. Oh, here it is. So the First Nations version of the New Testament, I'm currently reading this. It's very interesting. Just a different translation shifts your understanding a little bit. Also listening to, I've been reading Stephen Charleston's book, The Four Vision Quests of Jesus, which was very powerful for me to hear again a native perspective on Christian faith and think about some of these larger issues. Let's go ahead and bring our liturgy back up, and if y'all could close out our worship, I would appreciate it.
Holy One, stretch our circle wider, bring more loved ones within our awareness, and help us see that our neighbors, the animals, the plants, and the planet itself are our siblings, as beloved as our own selves. Let us be in awe every day. Amen.
May the strength of God pilot us. May the power of God preserve us. May the wisdom of God instruct us. May the hand of God protect us. May the way of God direct us. May the shield of God defend us. May the host of God guard us against the snares of the evil ones, against temptations of the world. May Christ be with us. May Christ be before us. May Christ be in us all. May Christ be over all. May thy salvation, Lord, always be ours, this day, O Lord, and evermore. Amen.
Dave, I think you're muted again.
Thank you. Those of you who have been streaming on Facebook and YouTube, if you wouldn't mind liking or just leaving a comment of where you're watching from, we'd appreciate it. It gives us a way to count you. I'm going to stop the stream in just a moment. Those of you on Zoom, if you'd hang around for just a minute more.